Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's Global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and we are talking every single week about various aspects of the pandemic. Today, we have a terrific, important topic for all of us to talk about: the lost art of connecting. And we have just the right person for us because serial connector and seasoned communicator, founder, and CEO Susan McPherson is with us. She's returning to our show with her exciting new book, The Lost Art of Connecting: The Gather, Ask, Do Method for Building Meaningful Business Relationships. She'll talk about how to strengthen your existing connections and make new ones during the pandemic. And if we ever get out of the pandemic, how that can continue. We are live on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Please share with your friends and family. They can join us live or later. Hi, everyone. I'm Sree Sreenivasan. Thank you so much for being here. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation and Audience Engagement at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and the co-founder of Digimentors, a company that does virtual events, conferences, and shows like this. So if you know anyone who is looking to do a virtual event or a hybrid event, hope you will get in touch. You can look us up at digimentors.group or just email me, sree@sree.net. If you haven't seen the show before, we have been on the air since the beginning of the pandemic, and we've had more than 1.5 million viewers, 545 guests, including 311 women. Yes, we counted, and we raised that percentage again tonight. We have had guests from 75 cities, 22 countries, and the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. We are doing this in partnership with Scroll Global, and our archives are on youtube.com/Sreenet. Please subscribe on YouTube, and please hit that notification button. Our producers are the awesome Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. They are both live tweeting our show. Please follow them and please send them ideas for where we go from here. We will be joining Susan in just a minute, but please tag a friend, share this with your friends and family. Anyone who is interested in making connections and who isn't would benefit from this. Maybe you have someone who is job hunting, maybe someone who has been looking for a new opportunity, someone who has been kind of stuck inside for 18 months and has not had a chance to develop their network and continue building that out. Those folks and so many more will benefit from this extraordinary book. So please tag a friend, share with them right now. We're on all the channels, and be sure to follow Susan as well. She is at Susan MCP1, Susan MCP1, and she's an author, founder, CEO. Her book is called The Lost Art of Connecting: The Gather, Ask, Do Method for Building Meaningful Business Relationships. And it's written with Jackie Ashton. So without further ado, let's bring on to our stage Susan.
I'm so excited to be here, and what an amazing introduction. Thank you so much, Sree. It's wonderful to see you and to get to liaise with your wonderful producer, Rose. I adore her.
Rose is awesome. Thank you. And you know, you are so generous to be with us on a 9 p.m. on a Thursday. I'm sure you've had a day full of Zoom calls. So my first question always is, how are you? How have you been through this pandemic? And then we'll talk about the book and more.
Of course. Well, I think like all of us, it's been a haul, and none of us back in March of 2020 would imagine that we would still be somewhat sequestered and isolated 18 months later, or how many, I've lost track, I think, at this point. And maybe it's a good thing we didn't know at the beginning that it was going to stretch for so many months. But I am an internal optimist, so I have to believe we are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And I am filled with gratitude because, I didn't lose loved ones. But I will say, for someone who is very much of an extrovert and loves to be around people, it was a very lonely 18 months. I don't have a significant other, I don't have children, and I don't have parents. I do have a dog who you may hear because she, for whatever reason, is wound up tonight. But she is what kept me going through this whole thing, and my wonderful colleagues at my company.
And you have obviously have a worldwide network of people who cheer for you and want the very best for you. But I can still see how it can be, in fact, very, very difficult for folks. And one of the things that has changed during these 18 months is how these calls have changed, right? You remember when that BBC interview where the baby came in, it was considered like the funniest thing, the biggest crisis in like television history. And now if a baby doesn't come in, if a dog doesn't walk across the screen, like, what's going on? Are you too polished and perfect? What's going on there, right?
Exactly. Great point. And I think, when we think about some of the silver linings, one of them is we don't have to be superhuman every day. It's impossible. And those of us who lead organizations, or people we know who lead organizations, need to take a step back and realize that we're all in this together.
So before we get to the book, maybe we can talk a little bit about your work and your business and talk about that, and then we'll set that up with the book.
Well, I run a social impact communications firm, consulting firm. We are 8 years old this month, and I am an accidental entrepreneur. I founded the company at age 48. I'm now 56. And it was a placeholder until I found the next job. And I always joke that I would have come up with a more creative name than McPherson Strategies. My ex-husband's name is McPherson. Thankfully, he's a wonderful guy, but we divorced in 2003. The company was founded in 2013. But I literally thought it was going to be a few months. Once I found my next job, I was going to retire the LLC. And here I am 8 years later. And we work with major corporations, NGOs, large and small, a couple of startups, rarely, but all about how these organizations can communicate their impact with the audiences they want to serve. So whether it could be their internal employees, for instance, with Dell or Salesforce, or it could be the general public through earned media and public relations. But again, the swim lane is always social impact.
And so important at this particular time to think about social impact. So I'm glad you're doing that. So we see the book right over your shoulder. So tell us all about it. And I know people will be really curious about this particular method that you have focused on. And you could have written a book about so many different things. How did it come to be this? And what is this?
Well, first and foremost, a lot of people see the title, The Lost Art of Connecting, and assume that it was written in response to the pandemic. But it actually was conceived, or the proposal was conceived 4 or 5 years ago. And my goal with the book was to try to get back the humanity in the compassion and the kindness that, perhaps, and I'm nothing against social media and technology, but when we had to be more intentional about how we communicated with others, whether it was writing letters, whether it was, the whole having to dial out 9 numbers, we were thinking much, more coherently than when we just zap off a tweet or, post an Instagram post. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, when I was growing up, both my parents were literally ultimate serial connectors, and they used the manual typewriter and the telephone, the rotary telephone, which was the technology during their lives. And I used to have to vie for real estate in the morning for my bowl of cereal, because they would have the 5 local newspapers and yesterday's or the day before's New York Times, because we were in upstate New York, and it would take 1 or 2 days for the New York Times to get there. And they would be sitting there clipping and cutting. And when an article struck them that it made them think of someone, they would then go to their manual typewriters and literally type short little missives, put the articles in envelopes, and keep the U.S. Postal Service in business. And this was every day of my life. And I just assumed everybody's parents did that. So in the late 80s, when I got my first fax machine, I was like a kid in a candy store, because all of a sudden I could do what they were doing, but faster and more efficient. Although, Sree, I don't know about you, but I don't know if those faxes ever got to their destination, because I could never figure out how to use a fax machine. And if anybody's paying attention tonight who remembers those, it was there was no fax machine that was like another fax machine. So you could never figure it out. Anyhow, the 90s came along. We got in.
Look, there will be, I'm sorry to interrupt, but since you brought it up, there will be people who are too young to remember. You have to have a cover sheet. And one of the things that would confuse me is you'd have to say 4 pages, including the cover or not, because it would make a difference, right? Maybe there were 3 sheets plus the cover, but if you said 3, then they would stop looking after the first 3 pages, including the cover. So all of these tiny things that make no sense now we have to worry about. And then the only way you'd know where it came from is it would have a little phone number at the very top printed onto it. And it was just a different time, but it was, in some cases, when the email came out, you might remember some people pushed back saying, we'll still only trust seeing that signature in that fax machine, in that fax that we got.
Well, I can really date myself because in the late 80s, I was working for PR Newswire, which is the service that companies would use to send their news release to the news media. And in the late 80s, literally, Boeing would actually hand deliver their 30-page news release that my team in Seattle had to rekey into a technology system. But it would literally, they would bring sleeping bags because it would be an overnight, and then they would read the release out loud to someone else to look for errors. So can you imagine? I know. We're sounding like dinosaurs. I need to stop. So I was excited to be able to immediately do what my parents were doing. And then in the mid 90s, once the internet came to be, I could take 15 or 20 people that I knew and send them an article that would, by virtue of sending them that article or that bit of information, it would connect them and it would almost create communities. And I did that all through the 90s into the aughts. And then, of course, we landed social media. And it was in 2007, I went on a retreat with 7 other women. And the goal of that retreat was to actually, we all felt we needed to articulate our elevator speeches, what we were good at, our superpowers. And it was that weekend that I finally got the gumption, or the got over my fear to be able to say, at the end of the weekend, I'm Susan McPherson and I'm a serial connector. Now, truth be told, I thought I was going to pee in my pants after I said it because it sounded so ridiculous. However, it was true. And now 16 years later, I wrote a book on it. So I'm giving this background just so people understand, where did this all come from? And over the years, people kept saying to me, you need to write a book and explain your methodology, because I was really successfully building connections. And I want to delineate between connecting and networking because I see them as very different things. I am not anti-networking by any stretch of the imagination, but connecting is meaningful. Connecting lasts the test of time. Connecting is one-on-one, one-on-two, not 1-on-100. Connecting is people who, when you reach out and maybe need something, they will come. If they can't, they'll make a date to come later. So I always want to, explain the difference, but I also understand networking is important, and we are going to continue to network. But I want to make sure for people, for instance, who are shy or introverted, connecting is more feasible, less scary, more and more doable. You can connect with 1 or 2 people at an event, whether it's an online or a virtual event, and then you can go hide in the bathroom.
I know that many people will relate to this. So talk about this particular method.
Yes,
that you
of course.
on. And of course, what you write about in the book applies to not just business relationships, but anywhere that you need to make a human connection.
Well, and I want to address that first, Sree, because we used to be very much have our work lives and our home lives. I'm sitting here in my living room. You can hear my dog whining because she wants to go outside. So in other words, those days are, yes, we can still have our personal lives and we can still keep things personal. That's not what I'm suggesting. But the same Susan that shows up every day for work is the same Susan that shows up at a birthday party or a wedding I figured it's hard enough being one person. Why do we need to be 2? And in the mid 90s, when we all of a sudden had internet and we would carry those ginormous laptops home from work, and plug them into the wall to, send our email or receive our email, I'd be doing dishes in between. So, that became the one, I'm one person. But in doing the book proposal for a business book, you always have to come up with a methodology. And I did some heavy duty reflection to find out, how have I been successful in building connections all these years? And I did notice that this, 6 years into my company's history, 95% of the business was inbound. So that told me that the connections I made in my 20s and my 30s and part of my 40s was actually paying off. And it wasn't like in my 20s and 30s, I knew I was going to have a company because, as I mentioned earlier, this was just a placeholder. So I really worked on what the methodology is, and I'll run through it fairly quickly. So obviously you can ask some questions, and I'm not doing all the talking. But the methodology is divided into 3 parts: gather, ask, do. In the gather section, you connect with the most important person in your life, and that is yourself. And you do some deep reflection to find out, 1, what is a meaningful connection to you? Because for every single person, it's different. 2, what are your goals over the next 4 years, 4 months, heck, 4 weeks? And who do you want to meet with or connect with or reconnect with that are going to help you meet those goals? But at the same time, I ask readers to think about, what are your superpowers? How can you be helpful to others? Because the underlying theme for the entire book is, when you go about our lives, work, play, fun, lead with how we can be helpful to others. And in this gather phase, knowing your superpowers, you will know when you're thinking about who you want to connect with, not only those people who can help you, but who you can help. Lastly, in the gather phase, how are you going to do everything in your power to break that hermetically sealed bubble that so many of us live in, that we tend to connect with people who are the same age as us, the same color as us, the same, cultural background as us? And how are we going to actually break out of that? Because when we meet people who aren't like us, we learn, we expand, we build the fabric of our lives. So that's the gather phase. The ask phase is all about learning to ask the questions of others, so you can learn what their hopes and dreams are, what their goals are, what their challenges are. And if you listen carefully, you can get to the do phase, which is the phase I absolutely love living. And that is where you take that data that you learned from others and you actually follow through and be the supportive, responsible, do the things you said you're going to do. So if you said to someone, oh, I hear you want to do X, Y, and Z, and you may have a way to support that person, you actually are able to do it. So It's a very quick snapshot at 225 pages, but I don't want to go into too much detail. And
no, of course, we want everyone to get the book. And what we're looking at is the Porchlight Books website, so porchlightbooks.com. And anybody who goes there will be able to, of course, you can get the book anywhere, but we encourage you to go to porchlightbooks.com. And they also have nice discounts if you're buying for your team, for example. This would be a wonderful gift for your team. So definitely check out the book. And I know we have some comments and questions coming in, so let's take a look at the comments. And Stefan Kaplan says, wonderful to be here. So looking forward to this. Shankar says hi from India. And Deborah from DC says, safe facts. That was one of the things that people used to joke about. And Jonathan Borstein is watching. He's watched 289 episodes of the show. No one, not even my wife, and even I have missed a couple where Rose and others have stepped in, but Jonathan's watched. What do you suggest? We all have people like this in our lives who are super cheerleaders of the work we do. What should I be thinking about for Jonathan? How does he fit into my friend circle?
Jonathan, and how does Jonathan fit into your friend circle?
Yeah, in like we all have people like this, right? Somebody who never asks for anything and just is super supportive of your work. How should we be thinking of
I
someone
would think
like
how you could be helpful to him and ask him.
Yeah.
Right? it's interesting. I often ask, a show of hands when I'm doing talks about when you receive a request on LinkedIn to connect with you. How often do they ask you to connect, and literally within 90 minutes or 2 hours, you get somebody trying to sell you something, right? And if I could see the audience, I would say, can you share, give us a show of hands, right? Yeah. And what about, Sree, if instead they said, you connect, and then they say, gee, I love your program. I have a great suggestion for 3 guests. And, oh, by the way, can you introduce me to? Wouldn't you take a sec? Wouldn't it be like a spark? Like, wait a minute. And in this day and age, back to the technology thing, when we reach out to people, we have all the tools at our disposal to find out some point of commonality and the uncommonality, so that when we reach out to someone, we can already make that connection. Now, obviously, not every single person is public facing. I mean, there are people. I have a cousin who is not on any social platform. So if you were to research him, it would be virtually impossible. But in my early days, we're talking the fax life, I had the Encyclopedia Britannica and the Yellow Pages to research someone before I called them. And generally, there was a gatekeeper. And now you can find out if somebody, what their political leanings are on Twitter. You can find out their professional past on LinkedIn, and you can find out if they have grandchildren on Instagram. So there's no excuse when you reach out to someone to just do a little bit. You don't have to stalk them, but you could do just something so that when you do reach out, it's not all about you asking for something.
I couldn't agree more. And I know people who are watching already will benefit from that idea. Apollo is watching from Philadelphia. And by the way, as we mentioned, these cities, if you have any memories of them or anything you want to give a shout out to the
restaurants in Philadelphia. My goodness.
Sorry, say that again.
It's a great restaurants in Philadelphia.
Oh my God, yeah. The eating there is terrific. Neil Parek's watching from DC. So your favorite DC memory?
Well, I lived in Foggy Bottom, Chevy Chase, Old Town Alexandria. And I mean, yes, I have many. I could tell, we could spend the next half hour on my life living in DC. And I worked at USA Today, the 2 towers that where USA Today used to be in Roslyn. And wow, it's changed a lot. Where in DC is?
He's outside. He's in Springfield, Virginia.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I will tell you, when IKEA opened in Springfield, I think it was Springfield. It was 1986, 1987, and I had spent 1985 as a college student for a year in Denmark. And when IKEA opened in the United States, it was their first store. It was their flagship store in Springfield. I drove there from DC because they were giving away a trip to Copenhagen as a door prize. And I wanted to win because I wanted to go back to Denmark. I had loved it so much. And so I will never forget that day driving to Springfield. I didn't win. But I did get back to Denmark years later.
That's good. Good to know. Stefan says that he's someone who has always believed in the power of connecting. I call it networking with purpose, he says.
Oh, see, that's, and again, I don't want to get too much into semantics, but I do point out that delineation because there are people that are fearful. And one of the tips I give in the book for people who may be shy is to basically do what you're saying. But before you go to an event, virtual or in person, think of a triumvirate, the power of 3. Go with the intention to meet 3 people, share 3 things, and learn 3 things. And then you can go hide in the bathroom. So in other words, it's a way to actually be intentional, lead with purpose. In other words, you're gonna learn 3 things, but you're also going to be vulnerable and share 3 things, which can be scary, but we can't expect others to share with us if we're not going to share a little bit with them.
That's absolutely lovely. So meet 3 people, learn 3 things, share 3 things. And if you can get it done right at the top, you said you're off the hook. But if it takes the whole night or the whole evening, that's also okay.
Right. And I went to 2 events last night, real live events, and it was the first time in a while. And I actually went, and even though I'm an extrovert, I use that, and I had that telling in my mind.
Okay. And are you doing elbows? Are you doing a namaste? What is your?
I
in
always,
person.
I mean, I'm a hugger, but I always want to ask. And so I always say, are you? And give the person. And obviously, I would never do that. And the same with shaking hands. I'd be like, what is your preference? Which I think is, I also do that as just a side note. When I meet people and I'm going to follow up with them, I always ask them, what is their favorite mode of communication?
Yes.
Because everybody is different, and if you want to continue a back and forth with someone, your chances of being successful go up exponentially if you communicate in the mode that is comfortable for that person.
Yeah, makes
And there's
perfect
somebody from Seattle in your audience. I lived in
Yeah.
Seattle from 92 to 2003.
Okay. Somehow the person's face picture didn't come through, but welcome and hello hello to the Seattle team. Let's see here. Paula is watching from Tallahassee. She's part of our awesome team at Digimentors and a great editor and writer. Have you been to Tallahassee, Florida?
I have been once, but it was about 20 years ago. And I was just there for a quick business trip. So I don't have any stories. I'm sorry.
And my father is watching in Kerala, India. Have you been to India?
No, but I've been to Sri Lanka, which is, from what I understand, close to Kerala, isn't it?
Yeah, very close and very similar. Yeah.
Yes, and the food. Oh my God!
Oh, the food.
Isn't this terrible? I've been to Antarctica. I've been to the Arctic. I've been to Afghanistan. I've not been to India.
I don't think you'd meet many people who've been to Sri Lanka and Afghanistan and not been
Not
to
India.
So
I know.
we've got to get you there. And by the way, these kind of books do great in India. So I hope your publisher has got an an Indian imprint and an Indian edition planned, because they love these kinds of books in India. Speaking of family, my wife Rupa is watching, and she says, in this digital age, how do you avoid transactional people or coach people not to be transactional? And please explain what that term means as well.
Well, I mean, transactional, I don't have my Merriam-Webster dictionary, but transactional people, tend to be very focused on what they can get, what's in it for me. And the entire underlying theme of the book that was written is all about how can you lead with helping others. But we can only be helpful to others if we find out what are their hopes and dreams. So I'm a big believer in coming with a, I don't want to say pre-written because that sounds so maniacal, but, literally having questions at the ready so that you can ask others to learn more about what is up with them. And, I will go so far as saying, we've all experienced this pandemic. Obviously, we've had, across the spectrum of how it's affected us, but it's the first time, that and climate are the two things that are connecting every single person on this planet. So there should be some way to have a meaningful conversation with somebody, given that fact that no matter who you are, you've been affected by this. But also to avoid transactional. And, one of the amazing people I interviewed in the book was Ruth Ann Harnish, who's a philanthropist, coach, former broadcast journalist. And she is a big believer in, setting the stage and being very intentional if somebody wants to meet with you and asking them what they're hoping to get out of that meeting. And therefore determining whether it is, maybe it doesn't need to be a meeting. Maybe it can just be a series of emails. Maybe it can be a phone call. Obviously, in this last year and a half, it would have to be a phone call or a Zoom chat. But in other words, it's really important to be direct. You're not then wasting your time. You're not wasting the other person's time. And then you both can be successful. And I realize sometimes it's hard. I'm not saying this is easy, but the more direct we can be, the less likely we're going to be transactional. And I'm sorry if you hear, my dog is like whistling because she wants to go outside.
I love it. It's perfectly fine. And I'm hoping my dog will hear and she'll come running here. My wife, by the way, who was dealing with some medical issues this summer, she says somebody forgot to tell the health insurance folks that faxes are out of fashion.
You're right.
She had to send faxes for insurance stuff.
Oh my God. Is that, well, Rupa, I am so terribly sorry because that's just disgusting. I'm sorry. And I'm not, all right, don't get me started.
So we have Jonathan's very, a very well-read person. So Jonathan says, I suspect I'm your Miss Miller, which is a Jane Eyre reference. So thank you, Jonathan. We have so many comments coming in from folks, and our LinkedIn user says, love her positive energy. Connecting is so very important. So while we're talking, I'm going to go and find out who that person is. And Rupa says that our dog is snoozing, so she's not hearing your dog whistling, unfortunately. We have a few minutes left with you, Susan.
Yes.
What are some mistakes that people make in connecting? Talk, if you can, about this Zoom period, this pandemic period, and then let's propel forward. We hope we will get out of the pandemic. And, I laugh because otherwise I'll be crying. The fact that it's basically October 1st of 2021 and we're still here. It's unbelievable and so frustrating. But let's presume we get out of this. Yeah. What are some mistakes that people make that they can correct now and later?
A couple of things. First of all, we can all learn to be better listeners. And in the research for the book, I learned how woefully bad I was at listening. I interviewed one of the world's foremost experts on listening, and he's done 4 or 5 TED Talks, Dr. Julian Treasure. And he talked a lot about the fact that we do anticipatory listening, which is something I do. And that's partially because I like to get from the ask to the do so quickly in my just enthusiasm to want to be helpful. And so sometimes I miss what the person's saying because I'm already calculating in my head. So what he taught me was to actually step back and really truly listen. And I now, and this may sound archaic, but I carry around a notepad with me when I go places so that if I am in a conversation and somebody says something, I can jot it right down. And I do that with online meetings as well. I mean, right on the countertop is a thick notepad where I jot things down at all the meetings I'm in. But one of the things I think we tend to think is when we've lost contact with people, we shouldn't bother to try to reconnect with them because we may feel we might have caused that long time apart. And I say, you know what? Doesn't matter. Reach out. And there's never been a better time than now because of this year and a half. Blame it on the pandemic, for God's sakes. Let's wring it for all it's worth. And reach out to people that you've lost touch with. The other thing that I did over the last year and a half, which kept me sane because I've been alone so much, and that is every day I would reach out to 3 to 5 people for literally, 3 seconds each. It could be a quick thinking of you or a quick, how are you holding up? Or do you need something? But every day I did that. And people would say to me, how do you have time to do that? And my response was always, well, I have time to brush my teeth. So just some thoughts to think about. And the gather, ask, do, the methodology I shared, I really think now at this kind of precipice is a really good time to do that. To really kind of think intentionally, what do I want the next year to be? Who are the people I want to connect with? And what's the list? Let's jot those names down and see who we know who might be able to introduce us. And lastly, and I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but lastly, sometimes we're just afraid to ask the people we're closest to for introductions because we think that maybe we're putting them out. I look at it this way. You're giving them the gift of an opportunity to literally expand the people they know's world. And every single person on this planet, no matter what role they play, no matter what job they hold, is deserved of our attention, our interest, our curiosity, and our compassion. I fervently believe that.
Well, that's so beautifully put. I'm just going to show folks here your LinkedIn profile, and just to see how well you live what you preach about connecting and what you do. So everyone, I'm not saying everyone go connect with her on LinkedIn. She may not be able to,
but don't, before you ask me to do something.
Yes, exactly. Don't be transactional, right? Yeah. But definitely follow her on Twitter. But I also wanted to show folks just a little tip on LinkedIn that I think people should know, is that they have this more button under this. So imagine this is someone you are already connected with and you want to do something nice for them. Look at this. They have multiple things now. They have this kudos that you can give that are a nice public way to thank Susan, or just say like she's a team player, inspirational leader. Just so simple. And you can share it in a post like that or send it privately, which is very cool. And another thing that they have is this button here. It says request a recommendation. Again, only do it to people whose recommendation you deserve. But look at this. It's so easy to do that now. What is my relationship with her? So I would say that Susan and I worked at different companies, right? Something like this. And then this was when I was host of the show or something like that. And then I would say, Susan, would you mind writing me a recommendation? See how simple that is. It takes away a lot of the awkwardness that you had in the old way of making those connections. So just a little tip for everybody watching. And I know that I've learned so much already. Deborah says, be naturally curious and interested in others, childlike, as we were thinking about. And Stefan says those hospital folks and insurance people probably still have Rolodexes on their desks. And by the way, it's okay to have a Rolodex. It's okay to have something written down. As you said, you carry on a notebook. Everybody has a different way of doing that. And by the way, Jonathan corrects me. He's thinking of a different Miss Miller. Miss Miller was a retired woman who became a celebrity as an audience member of early talk shows filmed in New York. Okay, so you learn something all the time. And Stefan says that a couple of weeks ago, I started having at least one "How are you? Let's catch up" call each day with someone I've never actually met in person or someone I haven't spoken to in a while. Enough with all the texting already. I need real contact with my people. It's been wonderful. So I know you would endorse that for sure. So as we are just getting ready here to wrap up the conversation, want to give Susan a moment to catch her breath, and then we're going to come back to her to tell us why everybody we know everybody watching should get a copy of the book, and why they should encourage their friends and family and associates to get a copy of the book as well. And we'll come right back to her. So Susan, we'll give you 1 minute to just relax there for a second. And here we are. This is the book that we're talking about. Let me just tell you what's coming up. On Tuesday, we have our 290th episode live from Vietnam. Lian Huang is going to be with us, and we have a co-organizer of a big fundraiser for helping Vietnamese families in Vietnam and here in New York. So please check out dum-boc.com. That's the name of the fundraiser that's working to, Vietnam did great, Susan, during the pandemic at the very beginning, but now is in awful shape. And so this is in partnership with food makers, creatives. And if you check out dum-boc, you could get some great deals and also help a lot of Vietnamese folks. So please check that out and join us on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And we also have coming up our friend Stefan has a wonderful show of his own called the Spin It Social Hour, where photographers share their work and journeys. And I see two friends on the screen because his guest is the great David Gonzalez, a reporter and photographer at the New York Times. He's on Instagram as 104BX for the Bronx. And live from Photoville, it's Stefan's 50th show. So do check it out. It's on Saturday at noon Eastern. And finally, before we bring Susan back on, one of the crazy things we do around here is we read the Sunday New York Times and the New York Times read along out loud every Sunday. We've been doing it for 6 years now. We're coming up in November. And we have Jared Adams as our guest, top criminal defense civil rights attorney and author of Redeeming Justice, From Defendant to Defender, My Fight for Equity on Both Sides of a Broken System. Imagine being on one side of the system now, but you used to be on the other side. It'd be a very powerful story, and please do check that out. So we're here back with Susan, and we're talking about the lost art of connecting and her book about improving your business connection. So the question to her is, why should everybody get this book?
Well, thank you. This has been such a delight, Sree, completely. And what a wonderful audience. I'm so grateful. Before I say why people might want to read the book or at least develop a real passion for connecting if they don't have it, I also just want to remind everyone to give themselves grace, especially as we start to kind of reemerge and go to events and feel pressure to go to events. We've been through hell, everybody. I mean, this is, first time in our lives have experienced something like this. So I just want to remind everyone, be graceful to yourself. And probably the top takeaway that I learned when writing this book that I'd love to share with all of you. And if you read the book, you'll learn about it, but also it's just an important note to make. And that is, if you make meaningfully connecting a bigger part of your life, you're actually extending the length of your life, all things considered, obviously, but even more than eating kale every day and running every day. Now, I will say I love kale. I live in Brooklyn, after all. But my running days are somewhat over after many, many years of injuries. So I will make connecting a top priority for myself and for those around me, because if I want to live longer. So I wanted to share that as a takeaway, that you don't have to read the book, but you certainly learn a lot about it if you read the book.
Beautifully put, and so modest, and at the same time. Susan, thank you very much. And everyone, please check out her book. Please check her out on Twitter, Susan MCP1. And we had a great conversation early in the pandemic about how to use the social media tools in better ways with our great friend, Marcy Albaher, who I miss also, who's a great connector and just awesome at the way she brings people together. Like, she's a great convener.
Oh, absolutely.
As well. So with that, we wish you all a great weekend and Friday, wherever you are in the world, and please be safe. And if you know someone who hasn't got a vaccine and can get a vaccine, please get it. You know, one of the reasons, Susan, we're in this situation, 80 million Americans who are eligible for a free vaccine could get it tomorrow morning, haven't gotten it, and that's so outrageous and so terrible. But thank you for bringing some joy into our lives tonight, and good luck to everyone watching. And I know that there are still comments coming in. Debbie says, a good reason, longevity, a good reason to buy a book, thanks. And Jonathan says, great show, we'll give him the last word. Bye-bye, everybody.